The sun was setting behind the skeletal remains of the once grand city. Tall buildings, now reduced to crumbling shells, cast long shadows over the streets littered with debris and forgotten memories. In the fading light, banners of the revolution, once bright and proud, hung in tatters from broken lampposts, their colors dulled by time and ash. Sitting in what had once been the heart of the city, Adira leaned against the cold stone wall of an abandoned building. Her rifle, worn from years of battle, rested against her shoulder as she watched the sun dip below the horizon. She had fought for this city, bled for it, and now, as the new regime settled into power, she wondered if it had all been worth it. They had won. At least, that was what the history books would say. The old regime had been overthrown, its leaders exiled or executed, and in their place stood the new government, promising a future of equality and justice. But as Adira looked around at the city, her city, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone terribly wrong. The revolution had been born out of desperation, a response to decades of oppression and corruption. The people had risen up, tired of living under the weight of tyrants who cared only for their own wealth and power. Adira had been one of the first to join the cause, fueled by a fire that had burned inside her since childhood, when she had watched her father dragged away by the regime's soldiers for daring to speak out against the injustice. For years, she had fought in the streets, in the forests, in the mountains, wherever the revolution had taken her. She had lost friends, family, and pieces of herself along the way. But through it all, she had held on to the belief that it was for a greater good, that the world they were building would be worth the sacrifices they had made. Now, though, standing in the ashes of the city they had fought so hard to liberate, Adira wasn't so sure. The streets were quiet, but it wasn't the peaceful silence she had imagined. It was the heavy, oppressive silence of defeat. The city had been taken, the tyrants ousted, but in their place, shadows had grown, taking root where hope was supposed to flourish. Adira rose to her feet and began walking through the ruined streets, her boots crunching over the broken glass and rubble. The city felt like a graveyard now, haunted by the ghosts of those who had fought and died for a cause that seemed more distant than ever. She passed by walls painted with the slogans of the revolution, words that had once inspired and unified the people, but now seemed hollow. Freedom for all. Justice will reign. They had chanted those words, shouted them in defiance as they stormed the regime's strongholds. But now, they were nothing more than fading graffiti on crumbling walls. Adira stopped in front of a small courtyard where, just months ago, she had watched as the revolutionary leaders gave their speeches to the gathered crowds. She could still hear their voices in her mind, the promises of a new world, of a future where everyone would have a voice. She had believed them then, with all her heart. But as she stood in that same courtyard now, the reality was stark and unforgiving. The new regime, born from the ashes of the old, had quickly begun to consolidate power. There had been purges, executions of those deemed traitors to the revolution, and whispers of dissent were silenced just as ruthlessly as they had been under the old rulers. The faces on the posters might have changed, but the methods remained the same. Adira had watched it happen, powerless to stop it. She had fought for the revolution, bled for it, but in the end, she was just another soldier in a war that never seemed to end. Adira. The voice startled her, pulling her from her thoughts. She turned to see Kellan, one of the few comrades she had left. He was limping slightly, his arm wrapped in a bandage, but his eyes were sharp, full of the same fire that had kept him fighting all these years. "You're still here," he said, walking up to her. "I wasn't sure if you'd stay after everything." Adira shrugged. "Where else would I go? This is all I know." Kellan nodded, looking around the courtyard with a grim expression. "Hard to believe, isn't it? We fought for this. And now we're left wondering if it was all worth it," Adira finished for him. Kellan sighed and sat down on a nearby bench, rubbing his temples. "I don't know, Adira. I keep thinking about everyone we lost, all the promises we made, and now the new government is just as corrupt, just as power-hungry. It's like nothing changed." Adira sat beside him, staring at the ground. She knew what he meant. She had felt it too. the disillusionment that came after the victory. They had fought to tear down the old regime, but in doing so, they had opened the door to something just as dangerous. Maybe it was never about changing the system, Adira said quietly. Maybe we were just replacing one set of rulers with another. Kellan looked at her, his eyes searching hers. You don't believe that, do you? She hesitated. I don't know anymore. I thought we were building something better. But now it feels like we were just pawns in someone else's game. Kellan was silent for a moment. Then he shook his head. Maybe, but we still have a choice, don't we? We can still fight for what's right. We can still make this city what it was supposed to be. Adira wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that there was still a way forward, a way to salvage the revolution they had given everything for. But deep down, she wasn't sure she had the strength to keep fighting. Not after everything she had seen. I don't know if I have anything left to give, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Kellan reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. You do. We all do. The fight isn't over, Adira. It never really is. But we have to decide what we're fighting for. Adira looked at him, seeing the determination in his eyes. He was right, of course. The fight wasn't over. But the question that had haunted her for months remained. What were they really fighting for? That night, Adira wandered the city alone. The streets were empty, save for the occasional patrol of soldiers in the new regime's uniforms. They paid her no mind. After all, she was one of the revolution's heroes, a name spoken with reverence among the ranks. But that reverence felt like a lie now, a hollow shell of the ideals she had once believed in. As she passed by the old government buildings, now repurposed as the new regime's headquarters, she saw the faces of the revolution's leaders plastered on every wall. They smiled down from posters, their eyes full of the same promises they had made during the war. But those smiles had grown cold, their words twisted into the same rhetoric they had once fought against. Adira stopped in front of one of the posters, staring up at the face of Joran, the charismatic leader of the revolution. He had been a symbol of hope, a man who had inspired millions to rise up and fight for a better world. But now, as she looked at his face, all she could see was the betrayal. She had stood by his side, fought in his name, and now he sat in the seat of power, ruling with the same iron fist as those they had overthrown. Is this what you wanted, Joran? She whispered to the poster. Is this the future we fought for? There was no answer, of course, only the cold wind blowing through the empty streets. The next morning, Adira made her way to the outskirts of the city, where the ruins of the old regime's prisons still stood. It was there that she had lost her father, taken by the regime for speaking out against the government. He had never returned, and his body had never been found. But Adira had vowed, all those years ago, to make sure his death had meant something. As she stood before the crumbling walls of the prison, she felt the weight of that promise pressing down on her. Her father had believed in justice, in fairness, in a world where people could speak their minds without fear of retribution. But now, even after the revolution, those ideals seemed further away than ever. She knelt by the prison gates, placing her hand on the cold stone. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I thought we were building something better, but I don't know if we ever really were. For a long time, she knelt there in silence, the memories of her father and the revolution swirling in her mind. She had given everything for the cause, but now she realized the cause had given nothing back. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Adira stood and wiped the tears from her eyes. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. The revolution might have won the war, but the battle for the soul of the city was far from over. And she wasn't done fighting yet.